Oh, the job of the GM. Preparing for every session, improvising on the spot, keeping track of plot developments, stretching your working memory to its limits during combat. It's a lot of work, and it can feel like a lot of pressure. And on top of that, players often do things that leave you scratching your head or just frustrated with them. It feels sometimes like they're going to take the game right off the rails on you. But what if they're not? What if they're just human beings responding naturally to this game? Is that problem player really a problem player? Maybe so, but maybe not. In this video, I'll talk about how to address those types of problems by reframing your thinking about running games and working with players. I'm Dave, and this is the one and only RPG Rundown. Under the pressure and complexity of running a tabletop role playing game, it's easy to start seeing player behavior as something to worry about. And it's not a bad thing to keep an eye on potential problems, but sometimes it's a little too easy to start seeing everything through a negative filter. There's no question that there is such a thing as a problem player, and people fret about this kind of thing enough that there's plenty of content here on YouTube about how to handle a problem player. Advice about how to deal with it runs the gamut in approach, and much of it's pretty good. But I'm here to add another wrinkle to the whole thing and ask that question. What if the person frustrating you in the game really isn't a problem player? Sometimes it turns out that you need to adjust your expectations as a GM. Take role playing itself, for example. Many people think that players should speak in character most of the time and very rarely out of character. There's even a whole tradition that you have to place your hand on top of your head when speaking out of character to make it feel a little weird, so you only do that when you really have to. The trouble is, not every player is comfortable speaking directly in character all the time. If you've done some stage acting or other type of performance, this may be no big deal to you. It feels like second nature. But if you have no experience with that kind of thing, then speaking in character sitting around a table with your friends in the first person can feel strange and uncomfortable. Really, all that's important is that the player says what the character would do or describes what they would say in a way that's in keeping with that character's nature. And if they're doing that, they're playing the character's role. Granted, it's really cool when people do speak in character most of the time and when they do it really well, but it shouldn't feel required. Your players shouldn't feel that they must be Hollywood actors just to sit at your table and have fun playing an RPG. Can you find a way to meet them where they're at? Another example of a worry we sometimes dwell on too much is metagaming. There's a lot of talk in the community about what a problem it can be and how to discourage it. Sometimes people go overboard calling any little thing metagaming, but there are fully legitimate ways for characters to discuss strategy and optimizing combat tactics which are not metagaming. Maybe you're playing a character who used to be or is now a military soldier or a knight. They understand combat tactics, so they advise the other characters, make up battle plans for conflicts they expect, and even call out suggestions during combat to the other characters. If it makes sense for the character to be doing this and the character is speaking in the combat turn when they're allowed to by the rules to characters close enough to hear them, this is not cheating. Or if your characters are exploring things you don't want them to, or going in directions you'd rather they not, it's time to think about why you feel this way. Are you maybe railroading them a little bit too much? Are you in too much of a hurry to get them to a specific encounter you're really excited about? You've got to be flexible and be able to let go of some of your expectations once in a while. Because if you really think about this, it may be a sign you're railroading the players too much. Give them room to explore and trust yourself to improvise at the table when things you haven't prepared for and didn't expect happen anyway. And they will. For whatever reason, the players want to know what's just over that hill to the east. You know, the one at the edge of the map you drew so you don't know what's beyond that hill either? Well, time to decide. Make up something on the spot that's simple and open to expand later. A mysterious temple, a strange-looking grave. Then throw an impromptu combat encounter on the way to that place to buy you some time. Between sessions, you'll pretty easily figure out how to connect the new location to the rest of the larger story. I promise you can do that. While we're talking about your expectations, note that it's easy to take your own for granted and not communicate them, but sometimes you need to. I had a problem recently in a D&D game I'm running in which, when the players were up to mischief in a supply shop, the shop's guard came after them with his sword out. In my mind, this was within the bounds of the laws and expectations of a medieval society. The PCs weren't nobles, and the merchant was close to nobility and rank. The guard didn't intend to kill them, but to get them to stand down and drop their weapons, but he had a legal right to essentially pull his gun on them. But the PCs surprised me by immediately attacking, with lethal damage, the guard, the owner, and the local noble NPC who had actually been a temporary member of the party, but who was also asking them now to stand down. This attack struck me as chaotic and potentially evil behavior, the disregarding the village's law and meeting the enforcement of the law with deadly force. But one of the players told me he had seen it as self defense. A guard was coming after them with a sword. Now, I happen to run medieval esque fantasy games, or early Renaissance, whatever, in a somewhat realistic, historically accurate way when it comes to class structures. This is in part due to me having spent time performing in a Ren fair and having learned a lot about how society really was in times like that. But I do this probably in a way that is not typical in such games and maybe something most players don't expect. And in thinking about this further, I realized I could have done more to establish the context. For example, I could have had the guard not draw his sword. That's simple enough. Even though he does have a legal right to do it, the fact is, we all live in a modern world, and it isn't so straightforward for us to shift our reactions with historical societies in mind, especially in the middle of a game when it seems like our characters are in peril. And on top of that, nuance like this is just confusing. It really is best to go broad strokes here. The guard could have cried out, "Put that merchandise down," and tried to grapple the player or knock him out with non lethal damage, something that was much more clearly an attempt to prevent the breaking of the law, not to just kill the party. I also had combat time start when the owner caught the player messing with the merchandise and had everyone roll initiative because the guard's weapon was out, and what happened on what turn and in what order was important to how this was going to go. But what I didn't consider was how it sounds to players when you just say, "Okay, roll initiative." To them, that usually means things are about to get deadly. And if it doesn't necessarily mean that, then that should be very clear to the players. If I had to do it over again, I would have had the shop owner call out to the PC, "Hey, stop what you're doing," and then waited to see if the PC did. And then if not, the owner could have called for the guard, and the guard could also be calling that out. "Halt, what are you doing?" And not have his sword out, even while moving toward the players during combat time. This would have been a better signal of how I intended this to go. The bottom line is, if you have certain specific expectations, you need to own those expectations and communicate them in some way, either directly or through adjusting what happens in the game. And you need to make it easy and fun to meet those expectations too. But hey, live and learn. Partly, these players just do things in a more active and even aggressive way than I'm used to, and it caught me off guard. But now I've got a broader idea of how to handle this for different play styles, and that's good. This thing about expectations is a big one I have learned about myself really recently, even after all these years of playing, and this is yet another reason why I love tabletop RPGs. There's always room to look at it in a new way and grow your understanding of the game. That's just one example, but I'm sure there are countless other ways that just a shift in your expectations can address bumpy game moments. Pay attention to this when running your games and see if you can find ways to adjust how you approach the game that still accomplish what you want, but don't really frame the player's choices as wrong. Maybe there are just ways you can better acclimate the players to your game world. Well, I hope this has been helpful. Can you think of examples from your own experience that are like this, that could be reframed? Leave a comment and let us know about them. And until next time, may all your 20s be natural. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Of course, it always helps us out if you like and subscribe. And check this video's description for a link to a few other cool things from Game Talk Network. Links to other channels in the Game Talk Network, like the Board Game Rundown, the Miniatures Rundown, and the Lorcana Rundown. A link to our Patreon for the Game Talk Network, where RPG Rundown is one of the pledge levels you can select. And a link to our GTN Discord server. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.